Fourth community meeting about a proposed groundwater sustainability fee. The meeting tonight, plus two others earlier this week in Rohnert Park and in Santa Rosa, are in response to a January 30th community meeting in Santa Rosa, where we realized people needed more time to learn about the fee and to ask questions. And I think that first meeting there were about 400 people. So we wanted to, and we also wanted to take this on the road so everybody didn't have to always travel to Santa Rosa. We would get some people from the north, and we have some people from the Windsor area here today, so we're glad to make it easier for you to attend. And we also delayed the board meeting by a month. It was supposed to be February 14th so that we could gather all this input, and I've heard there's good input that some of it can be implemented fairly easily, so we'll see what the board says when we all get together, which is, I think, next week. Before we get into the meat of the meeting, I want to ask the other Santa Rosa Plain board members and advisory committee members who are here and member agency staff to stand so we can see who you all are. And some of you are Windsor employees, so I know those very well. These folks are available to answer questions afterwards. And so we finally have a chance locally to make sure there's enough groundwater for everyone today and into the future. This may not sound like a big deal, but California is the last Western state to manage groundwater. The bad news is that we have to figure out how to pay for it. The GSA board and its advisory committee have been meeting for over a year to determine a funding system that is legal, politically feasible, equitable, and fair. We've met 14 times to discuss the fee, all in public meetings, and to talk about options. In addition, we've had smaller ad hoc committee meetings that have met many times to work on technical details and to provide feedback to staff and consultants. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to discuss the proposed groundwater sustainability fee and a partner proposal to register groundwater users. You will have an opportunity to provide feedback and ask questions after the presentation, and we're eager to hear your thoughts. And I'll be in the back also taking notes so that we can make sure all the board members are on the same page with what we've heard from you in person. So we want to make it really clear that no decisions are being made tonight. The purpose of the meeting is to share information and to get your feedback. And now I'll turn this over to Ann DeBay with Sonoma Water, who will help facilitate the meeting tonight, and then she will introduce others who are here. And there's snacks a little bit, and food and water in the lobby. Feel free to eat all those cookies, please.
Thank you, Director Fudge. Really appreciate you being here. And so before we get started with the materials, we just want to get a sense of who's in the room tonight. So if you're a rural well owner, you just use your well for your home, your garden, and irrigating plants and things like that. Can you raise your hand? Okay, so I think most people, it looks like rural well owners. Do we have any farmers or ranchers, people who use their well water for food or grapes or anything? No? Okay. And then I guess the final question, and there are some folks like this in Windsor, do we have anybody who lives in the city and gets city water, but you use your well for irrigation? All right, thank you. So at least one person, but most of us are rural residential well owners. That's good to know. So just a reminder, the meeting is being taped, and so we can make sure that the tape is clear, and also so you can hear everybody when they're making the presentations. If you could just remember to silence your cell phone, that would be really helpful. Everyone should have a copy of the presentation, and you can follow along. If you have questions or comments about something the presenter is saying, if you could just make a note of it, and we will make sure that you'll have time to ask your questions and provide comments after the presentation is done. And as Director Fudge said, no decisions will be made tonight, but we want to get your feedback to share with the board. And to make sure we record it accurately, we are taping the meeting, which will be available for you to watch online probably early next week. And then Simone here is taking notes. So we'll have your comments recorded a couple of different ways. You can also leave them kind of verbatim, though, if you want. We have comment cards that you can just leave on the table, and we'll record those. And we also have an online comment form, so you can go onto the website. The address will be posted at the end of the presentation, and you can just fill out your comments there. So finally, we just ask that your remarks be respectful. We know that not everybody is happy about this proposal. But the board members and the advisory committee members and the staff have worked really hard for more than a year to come up with a proposal that's fair, that's efficient, and that's legal. And they understand that people may not be happy, but insulting people isn't super helpful either. So I'm going to switch now to our first speaker, who is Sandy Potter. Sandy works for the town of Windsor, and she was really instrumental in helping create this agency, which was required by state law, as she will discuss. And Sandy, what's your official title? That's okay. What's your official title? Deputy Director of Water and Environmental Management for the town of Windsor. So thanks, Sandy.
Thank you so much, Anne. And thank you for being here today. I recognize many of you, and I'm okay. And the clicker works by. Okay. Yes. So I recognize many of you. I've worked for many years in the water resource field in Sonoma County. And for those of you who I don't know, welcome to the town of Windsor Council Chambers. I want to provide a little bit of background about the Groundwater Sustainability Agency and our new approaches to managing groundwater in California. In 2014, we were at the height of the drought in California, and we were seeing pictures. We were the only state who didn't have groundwater regulations in the western United States. But we were seeing photographs in the newspaper and on TV during the height of the drought that was showing examples such as this, where we saw the land surface dropping more than 5 feet in only 25 years. We were also seeing pictures of dead orchards and communities who were receiving water from water trucks because their wells had gone dry. We were really facing a crisis. And so this prompted the legislature to pass and the governor to sign the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which we also refer to as SGMA, in 2014. Fortunately, the Santa Rosa Plain doesn't have problems like the Central Valley or some of the coastal communities. But the basin does have some problems, and a U.S. Geological Survey study in 2014 revealed that not all the water that we use from the basin is getting replenished. And although that shortfall is not huge, over time, it can add up to potentially impacting the groundwater availability and the groundwater quality. Thousands of people in the Santa Rosa Plain depend on clean and reliable groundwater for drinking, for landscape irrigation, for agriculture. And wild plants and animals also rely on the groundwater to make sure we have flow in the streams during the summer and the dry season. And the farmers who are critical to our economy and our culture also rely on groundwater and surface waters to irrigate their crops and to provide water for their animals. So you can see that the loss of groundwater quality and quantity could really have a significant impact on our community. For all of these reasons, many of the policymakers in Sonoma County supported the bipartisan Sustainable Groundwater Management Act that became law, the SGMA, and that law provides us with a tool for our local communities to manage and protect our critical groundwater resources. And while SGMA isn't perfect, and as many laws that start off may need some refinement, it does allow for us to have local control, and that means that our groundwater sustainability program can reflect our local priorities. So for Sonoma County, that meant that leaders and stakeholders met to form the GSAs, the Groundwater Sustainability Agencies. Initially, SGMA applied to 3 basins in the county. It was Sonoma Valley, the Petaluma Valley, and the Santa Rosa Plain. And groups worked very hard to facilitate a process that involved multiple public meetings and workshops to create these 3 groundwater sustainability agencies. And now I'm going to show you on this slide the 3 kind of milestone requirements in the law. And the first one, step 1, was the formation of the Sustainability Agency. And we worked together, and we did complete this on time for the 2017 year. So the next slide is just an example of some of the meetings that the GSA holds. This is the Santa Rosa Plain GSA. It has a 9-member board with alternates and also a 17-member advisory committee, as some of those folks are here tonight. And I'm just going to walk through the various interests that are represented on that board of elected officials, as well as the advisory board, because it really is very broad range of interests. It includes rural residential well owners, agriculture, business, environmental interests, the Federated Indians of the Great Rancheria, water suppliers, cities and towns like the town of Windsor, and the county. And so as you can imagine, there are a lot of different thoughts and opinions about the best way to approach our groundwater management. But there is one thing that everybody agrees on, and that's that groundwater is a precious resource and that we need to work together to protect it, to make sure we have it available for future generations and that we meet the mandates of the law. And since the GSA was formed in 2017, we've held 21 meetings, and the fee proposal that's going to be talked about tonight has been talked about and discussed at 14 of those meetings. So that brings me to the next slide, which shows the step 2 of the SGMA requirements, which is the requirement to develop a groundwater sustainability plan, and we refer to that as the GSP. That's the process that we're currently in right now, and it's really the heart of the new law. It will create a roadmap for our local community to achieve sustainability by the deadline in step 3, which is 2022. And fortunately for us, we competed statewide for grant funding to help us to prepare our GSP, and were awarded $1 million from the state to help us with the plan. So the plan is a very detailed, quantitative analysis of how we are going to manage our groundwater resources to prevent the negative impacts that we saw happening in the Central Valley and some of our coastal regions. And this slide shows a graphic of the 6 sustainability indicators that the plan is going to set out a management strategy for. And on the top, starting on the left, is groundwater quality, and then land subsidence. And then on the far right top is the groundwater level that we have to monitor and make sure that it doesn't go too low. And then on the bottom left, we see indicators for storage, seawater intrusion, and surface water quality, the interconnection between surface waters and groundwaters. This plan is being under development, and there's a lot of information on the GSA's website, and it's discussed at every board and advisory committee meeting. So I encourage you to pick up the pamphlets that are available here today and to visit the website to become familiar with the contents that are required by the state for the plan, and also to provide your feedback as we move forward in the plan process, which is going to occur over the next few years. So now I'm going to hand over the presentation to Andy Rogers, who is the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Sustainability Agency Administrator. Thank you for your time.
Good evening. My name is Andy Rogers. Thanks, Sandy. Thank you, Deb Fudge, for introducing us. And thank you guys for being here. I'm the administrator for the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you more about the agency, and then I'm going to go into very great detail about why you're here, which is related to the fee. I'm a geologist by education and by profession, and I never would have guessed I'd be doing something like this 30 years ago, but here I am. My family lives on a rural residential parcel in the basin. We have a well that was installed in the 1940s, and it has its own personality. And I know very well that what that's like, and it's hard to keep those things going, and I bless it just about every day. I'm honored to be here today working on this important agency. It's new, it's really important, and it's really critical we do it right. And so I guess I like a challenge, and the only way we're going to get there is if you guys help us get there. I want to be clear as I possibly can. This is a lot of information. Hopefully we've been able to present it today in a way that you understand. I'm not here to convince you of anything that's good or bad. I just want you to understand what we've come up with. That's the main thing today. So you can ask questions. I want to inform your questions. That's really what I want to do. Thankfully, I'm surrounded by a lot of really smart people like Sandy and Ann and Simone that can answer a lot of questions that I can't. So there's a lot of smart folks working on this project. So I'm going to be discussing the proposed groundwater sustainability fee, and I really appreciate your attention and really depend on your input and your questions. So I'm hoping that I seed a number of those questions today. So before I get to the specifics of the fee, I want to just talk again about, there was a slide earlier that Sandy talked about. There are 3 basins that were named by the state that have to comply with this law: the Petaluma Valley, the Sonoma Valley, and the Santa Rosa Plain. And the Petaluma Valley and the Sonoma Valley are moving in a slightly different direction. And that is, right now, they're not talking about developing this fee like the Santa Rosa Plain is. So why is that? And really, there's a number of reasons, but the main ones are economics. So even though it costs the same to run a GSA, so the GSA has to do all these things that the state requires. We have to form, we have to have agreements, we have to meet, we have to have public meetings, and we need to develop this really big technical plan to address those 6 items that Sandy Potter just talked about. And we're going to tell you more about that in a second. The other thing is, so that same cost that we have to bear, the Petaluma Valley and Sonoma Valley have to bear as well. But there are far fewer folks there. There are far fewer users. There's less intensity going on. And there are, I think there's 9 member agencies in the GSA here, and there's 5 and 6 in Petaluma and Sonoma Valley. There's soon going to be a 10th board member. So there's a lot more interests that want to weigh in. And this fee process that we're talking about is going to allow us to basically come up with a fair way to do what we need to do to benefit all of us. Now let's talk about the fee. So just wanted to cut right to the chase. The fee is based on estimated and actual use. So what does that mean? So actual use is measured, metered water use. So who is that? The large water users like cities, towns, large agriculture, who have for decades and decades and decades had meters on their wells, and they've had to report their uses to the state forever. And so we know an awful lot about what those groundwater uses are. But they are not the vast majority of folks in the basin. The vast majority of the folks in the basin are probably mostly folks like you and me, where we estimate the use. So we're not here, and I'm going to say this probably 5 or 6 times tonight, we're not here asking for people to put meters on their well. We're not interested in that, and I'm going to tell you several times also, even if we wanted to, we're not allowed to by law. So the fee is based on the amount of water used, whether it's actual or estimated. And I'm going to talk about both of those in much more detail. But the unit of measurement for water use is an acre-foot. An acre-foot, and these aren't numbers that we made up, these have been long established units. 326,000 gallons is considered an acre-foot, basically a foot of water that's an acre in size. So rural residential properties would pay an annual fee, and I'm going to go into detail where these numbers come from. They're not random. They're not picked out of the air. Would pay somewhere between $8 and $13 a year. So that's the fee that we're talking about for rural residential owners. Large groundwater users And we get a lot of comments, why aren't the big users paying for all this? They use way more than we do. Well, it is scaled that way. So the way that we're coming up with this fee, the large water users would be charged somewhere between $16 and $26 per acre foot annually. So I'm going to go into detail how that's calculated. And this fee, if approved, would be in place for 3 years and at a fixed rate. So whatever rate we come up with, and these ranges, it's going to land somewhere in between, would be in effect and fixed for 3 years. So, as we noted on the prior slide, the fee is based on, oh, I missed this slide. So the fee would go into effect, if approved, on July 1st. On July 1st, then what happens is on the property tax bills, there would be an item for the fee that's determined. And we're going to tell you about that. And I really want to be, this is really an important slide. So as somebody that pays taxes myself, if I'm writing a check to a government agency, my brain says that's a tax. It is not a tax. It is money that is going from you to a government agency, but is scaled and throughout the basin. And so there are some parcels that don't use any groundwater. They're not going to be assessed a fee. And as I've described, and I'll describe a lot more detail, the large users are being charged based on usage, and then most of the rest of the folks are being paid on one estimated groundwater use. So that's why it is a fee. And the property tax bill is just a cost-efficient way for us to be able to collect those fees. So how do we know how much groundwater people use? So again, I've mentioned that we know a lot about how much water cities use and large pumpers use because they've had to meter their wells forever, and they report that information to the state. So we have tons of information to base those actual amounts on. And again, the vast majority of us on the basin don't have meters, and we're not planning for you to have them, unless you want them. That's up to you. And this is a really common issue throughout managing water in the West. The one fortune we have in being the last state to regulate water is a lot of folks have tried a lot of different things and figured these things out. So these estimates that I'm going to tell you about are very, very well-founded studies, and they correlate with other studies. And so we have to use numbers that are based in reality. We can't just make up something. So hopefully I'm going to be able to describe some of that. So I'm going to tell you about a rate, and then I'm going to talk about a fee. So the rate I'm going to tell you about is kind of an overall factor that basically determines the average annual cost of running the groundwater sustainability a year divided by the acre feet of groundwater that's used annually in the basin. And you've probably seen the map of the basin. It's a funky line, and you're wondering how they came up with this line. It doesn't follow any roads, doesn't follow streams, it doesn't follow anything. It's based on surface geology. It was mapped many decades ago, and so that's where this line came from. That came to be a legal boundary according to the state, and that was designated. So that's where that boundary comes from. We didn't draw that line. So the amount of acre feet, and Sandy alluded to this a bit on the groundwater management plan that was done before SGMA was adopted or was approved, is that they know how much water comes out of the basin in a year, and they know roughly how much goes back, and that there's a slight deficit for what goes back versus what comes out. But that number, and I'm going to say this a number of times, is estimated to be around 17,000 acre feet is estimated to come out of the Santa Rosa Plain each year. So equals basically a per acre foot rate. So the cost to the Groundwater Sustainability Agency every year divided by the amount of water that comes out of the basin in total equals a per acre foot rate. So basically, and I'm going to tell you about exactly what this number is. So first I'm going to go into the average annual cost of running the GSA. But that rate is going to be really important as we talk about the fee, because that number is what everybody's fee is based on. So, and I'm going to tell you about this. So when the law was put in place, this area came up with an estimate of what it's going to cost to comply with SGMA. And basically over 5 years, so setting up the agency and doing all the legal requirements, meeting all the meeting requirements, and then also developing this very significant technical plan, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, would cost over 5 years about $3 million. So we're almost through year 2 of this, and the member agencies, you see on your agenda, there's a list of the board members, and then there's a list of the advisory committee members. So the board's members that are represented on that agenda are the ones that have been funding us to get to this point. And so that number is almost $1 million. And the agencies have said, we're going to defer repayment of that. So that basically allows us to discount what the 5-year operating expenses are by close to $1 million. Also, as Sandy mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of smart people working on this agency. And when this came up, this is a huge unfunded mandate. Well, our staff locally went to work and competed statewide to get awarded $1 million grant to help us prepare the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. A massive, massive amount of money to help us get there. So that leaves $1 million that we need to fund for the next 3 years. So $1 million divided by 3 comes out to be $337,000 a year. That's what we're trying to finance. So going back to the formula, the average annual cost of running the GSA, $337,000, divided by the 17,000 acre-feet of water used annually in the basin, comes out to a per acre foot rate of just a little bit less than 20 bucks. But I'm going to use 20 bucks for tonight. So how is the groundwater sustainability fee calculated? So some of the same numbers here, but the amount of groundwater used annually, 17,000 acre feet. Remember, an acre foot is 326,000 gallons, times the rate, 20, equals the fee paid annually. So for the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, that goes back to the $337,000. But this same formula is what's used to calculate each individual fee. So the same thing that applies to the GSA, it balances out, and this is how we're looking now at the fees. But the rate was really important to describe here so we can talk about the fee so it makes sense. So I'm going to start with just a yellow line, and that yellow line is representing the $20 rate. So we're going to talk about rural residential parcels first. So the estimate that is used is a half an acre foot a year. So that's roughly, 160,000 gallons a year. We totally recognize that there's a lot of people, including myself, use a lot less than that in a year. So the studies also show there's a lot of folks that use a lot more. So whether they've got big gardens, whatever it is, but we've got 5 studies that all hover around rural residential parcels are around a half acre foot annually. So that's where that estimate comes from. And those studies are all available on those are all posted on our website, aren't they? Yeah, we'll get them available if they're not already. So again, we can't pull these numbers out of the air. I would love to make that 0.00005, but we can't. It's not based on anything. 0.5 times. Now, remember the yellow line is the $20 line. since we're still refining some of the fees, we still don't know exactly where it's going to be, but we think on the low side, the charge is going to be $16 per acre foot. The rate, this is the rate I'm talking about again, equals the $8. So this is where that comes from. So 16 times 0.5 equals 8. So that's where the $8 comes from. So again, for rural residential on the high side, we're thinking we have the half acre foot times 26 equals 13. So that's where the 13 comes from. So that's where the range is. I really think we are going to land closer to the yellow line, the $20 mark, but that's where that range comes from. So on the kind of the other end of the spectrum, here's an example from Santa Rosa. Again, a pumper that's been keeping records for a very long time, reporting them to the state. Their average acre foot of water pumped annually is 1,598 acre feet of water of groundwater that's pumped from the Santa Rosa Plain Basin. Times, again, the $20 line with going to the low and then the high. This is the low, times 16. They're going to be paying $26,000 a year to the GSA annually. On the higher side of the $20, we have the same numbers, times 26. Could be up to 42,000 a year. So again, just demonstrating the larger users are paying a lot more. Another example, let's talk about a grape grower with 100 acres of irrigated vines. This is a bit more complicated because different crops use different amounts of water. It's called the crop coefficient, and you farmers know about this very well. But the numbers that, based on studies, and we had a focus group with UC Cooperative and the Farm Bureau to help us come up with these numbers. But 0.6 acre feet per acre multiplied by 100 acres is about 60 acre feet a year. And again, 100 acres of irrigated vines using that factor of 0.6 times, again, the rate. So the $16 acre foot on the low side is about $960 a year on the low side. And then we have the same numbers on the high side, $26 rate per acre foot will range up to $1,560. So again, they'll probably also end up somewhere in between there for a grape grower with 100 acres of irrigated vines. So there was one more example. And I think there was only one hand for this, but on the third line, the urban supplemental irrigation wells, and that's just a fancy way of saying somebody who's hooked to a water supply system, a city or a mutual or something like that, but also has a well, it comes out to about $1 to $3 a year. So if we didn't do this locally, the state was very kind in giving us their schedule of rates of what it would cost for them to come in and do it for us. So here's a comparison of the state's fees. So they would charge every well owner $300 base fee. And then for rural residents, they'd be paying $100 a year. And then as well as the urban supplemental irrigation well folks, $100 a year. And they would charge $40 an acre foot for what I was talking about earlier, which is much, much less locally. It gets a little worse in that what this doesn't get us is a groundwater sustainability plan. We're still on the hook to prepare a groundwater sustainability plan. All this money goes to Sacramento instead of staying local and being a lot less expensive. So our board, I think quite wisely, chose to let's take the bull by the horns locally and make this be something that is of high value and as low cost as possible. So that's what we're talking about today. So one of the things that we have to do and is we have to involve pretty much everybody in the basin. We have to make this equitable. So the users are all participating. So a big part of that is a lot of you and myself as well, rural residents. So through that groundwater management plan that the USGS put together It was a big process that went on for 10 years, maybe more. The rural residential use adds up to about 24% of what's extracted out of the Santa Rosa Plain. So of the 17,000 acre foot, 24% comes from folks like myself. So we need to include that. So as an individual, you're a very, very, very small groundwater user. As an aggregate group, it's a very significant part of the extraction that happens in the plain. So how do we assess fees on rural residents? Well, we're required to then be a regulator. And I'm air quoting because it wasn't something that we all were excited about. So what does that mean? What do we do to regulate? So looking at this, our board direction after the eye roll was, if you need to try to find something that is the absolute least intrusive, the least burden, the simplest and the clearest possible thing we can do and still pass the test of being a regulation, and something that has to be free, one time. So we had these hurdles to cross to get there. So I think we've gotten there, and I'm going to tell you about what this means. But really, essentially, it is allowing us to find out, do we have the information? Is it correct or is it not? And if it's not correct, we would like you to help us correct it. So how does the groundwater user registration program work? I like to call it a participation program, not a registration program, but it's called a registration program. So if this fee and registration program is approved, the owners of parcels assume to use groundwater. And I'm saying that with emphasis because one of the things our staff is working really hard to do is make sure we get as much information right as we possibly can. So there are some parcels that are literally driveways or parcels that are rights of ways on corners. There's no groundwater use. There's not a fee being associated with it. So we're trying to get rid of all the ones that we're very confident do not use any groundwater. So we may get some of those wrong. So when we send these letters out, which will include parcel number, address, parcel size, and the type of land use, if we got that wrong, you're like, I don't use any groundwater. I'm hooked up to the city. We want to hear that. So if the information is correct, though, you can do nothing. Or you can provide us with the correct information if it's wrong, and you can give us additional information if you'd like. We've gotten a lot of feedback like, okay, first of all, I use a lot less water than you think. I want to show you that. I want to show you where my well is and how I am efficient. The more information we can get, the better we can do our job. There are voluntary groups that measure groundwater in neighborhoods to make sure that they're keeping their local levels. If you wanted to share that with us, we'd love it, but it's not a requirement. As far as keeping this simple and easy to do, this is an online transaction if you'd like it to be, but we're certainly available by phone or mail or all the regular ways as well. But it's definitely, we're looking for as easy as possible. One of the things that I'm going to talk a little bit about in a second, but this is probably a good point. When I mentioned there's that funky line that you need to see where this line, where that line is, I know that there's a lot of questions. Is my parcel actually in the Santa Rosa Plain or not? It's really hard to tell even from a giant map that's in the hallway there. It's hard to tell from the maps that are out there because it doesn't show parcels versus that. There's a lot of, I live right on the border, so I understand that. We're going to soon have an interactive map available on our website where you can put in your APN or your address and you can go and see specifically where your parcel is relative to the line. Because I know that we've had people come to meetings in the past that found, oh, I'm just outside of the basin. The other point is, on the map that shows the 3 basins, there was the blue Santa Rosa Plain one, a dark blue. That's the Santa Rosa Plain area. And then there's kind of a fuzzier blue around it, which is the watershed. This this is not a watershed area agency. It's just the Santa Rosa Plain groundwater basin. So if you're in the watershed but not in the basin, this fee does not apply to you. So, some more things that I want to make sure are clear. We are not requiring meters to be put on wells. We are not requiring anybody to do any monitoring. But like I mentioned, there are a lot of volunteer folks out there, and if you wanted to do that, great. And if you wanted to share the information because you're concerned and you want some help with it, we'd love to have that information. But it is not a requirement. We're not asking anybody to fill out forms. We're not asking for anything except for if we get something wrong, tell us and help us correct the information. The other thing is, being a new agency, we're under no illusions that maybe some folks don't want to talk to us. They're like, who are these guys? They're coming out of nowhere. I've never heard of this agency. But I have a relationship with the Ag Commissioner's Office, or I've done plenty of stuff with Permit Sonoma. So we're working with both of those agencies. So those are also available to you to either asking questions about whether it's about the registration program or about the fee, or if you want them to get some information, there's going to be folks at all those agencies available. And we are, of course, also available, but again, we didn't want to think that you'd want to talk to us, but I hope you do. So here's some definitions and some things I just wanted to make sure you had in your hand. I'm just going to go through. But one of the reasons this regulation came around is we have to regulate what's called, it's a fancy Latin word, de minimis users for, in order to assess a fee. So minor users, small users is a much better word, but what SGMA uses is de minimis users. And what's that defined as is 2 acre-feet of water per year or less. So about 650-some thousand gallons a year or less is considered in the state's eyes a de minimis user. That's a lot of water. So that's why so many people fall into that category. Again, the purpose of this program is to make sure we get our information right. And as I said before, even if we're really interested in metering everybody's well, SGMA, the law, the state law, does not allow us to do that. It does not give us the authority to do that. So I can say it all day long, but the law is probably more comforting than me just saying it. So kind of what's next? We've gotten very clear direction from our board that they want to hear what you guys think, your ideas, your questions, and they want to hear what you guys think. I mean, everybody's been thinking about this for a while. There's been a lot of public meetings. We had a really big public meeting at the end of January, and it was clear that we needed to do some more outreach. So our board directed us to do these meetings this week for this purpose. Is everything done after this? No. So this is an ongoing dialogue. We know that we're going to get some things wrong, and I think we're going to get some things right. But what I really hope is that we are going to develop something that is valuable, there is value here, and we're going to be doing this at something that is the lowest cost possible. Next week, next Thursday, our board is going to hear a lot of this same information, and what they're going to be considering is the methodology for how the fee was developed. So all the steps for how rural residential fees are developed, how the acre-foot fee is being developed, and kind of how the whole program is being set up, and agriculture and all the various other users. So they're going to hear about that, and did we get the methodology correct? So they're going to be considering that. And then right now, we're looking at an April 11th meeting to consider approval of that or whatever from there. And again, this would take, if it's approved, takes effect in July, and then would show up in the property tax bills towards the end of the year. So if you haven't been to our long URL website, there's a lot of information there. I think sometime next week, maybe the week after that at the most, we're going to have that interactive map embedded on that, so you can use that. I think that's going to answer a lot of folks' questions. And then over time, we can probably make it more valuable. So when you use that, if there are things about that interface or our website you think would be much more informative, you can't find information, we want to hear that kind of stuff too. This website needs to be something that's usable to everybody. So I'm going to turn this over, and I really hope that I have a feeling I'll hear from a few of you, and I'm looking forward to it, honestly. And your board really, really cares about what you think. So please tell us.
So thanks, Andy. Oops. You guys hear me? Can you hear me? I'll go up here.
Test.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so I think we have another microphone. Maybe we can use one of these for people in the audience.
Test.
So we'd love, as Andy said, to hear your comments and questions. We have, in addition to Sandy and Andy, we also have Marcus Trotta, who is a hydrogeologist and who is the technical staff for the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, who can answer all kinds of questions. And so I think rather than have you guys come up to the podium, it's kind of like you'd be making a speech. You may be more comfortable if I just brought the mic around and you could make comments and ask questions that way. Is that all right? Okay. And so there's not a ton of people here, so maybe around 2 or 3 minutes of comments, and if you go on too long, we'll maybe ask you to finish up that comment in a written format. And so I think, do you guys have a mics up there that you can use? I don't think they're.
Test.
Okay, great. All right, cool. Anybody have any comments or questions? Here we go. Let's start with you.
With the water usage through the wells at the Russian River for the aqueduct that goes south, is that all part of the similar plan as the Santa Rosa for like Petaluma and Novato on south, or any other cities?
Marcus, do you want to take that question, or Sandy?
I just wanted to point out that the town of Windsor has a well field on the Russian River, but they're located outside of the boundaries of the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Basin. And many of the other wells may be also.
Yeah, Sonoma Water's wells on the Russian River that provide the majority of water to urban users in the Santa Rosa Plain, Sonoma Valley, Petaluma Valley, Marin County. Those are also on the Russian River, and they're outside of this basin, so are outside of this GSA's authority.
So they're using water from our basin?
No, the Russian River Basin is outside of the Santa Rosa Plain Basin, but the water that's produced there comes in and is provided to cities and towns here in the Santa Rosa Plain, including the town of Windsor gets some of their water from the water agency's wells. And so those actually serve to offset some of the potential groundwater use. If the water supply wasn't there, there likely would be more groundwater pumping from the cities in this basin.
Yeah, and just also, just to clarify too, that although those the wells on the river are outside of the basin, Sonoma Water does have groundwater wells that are also in the basin. So, and most of the cities and towns do, except for Windsor is outside. Other questions? I thought I saw other hands being raised. Sure.
You are asking us to hear what you have to say for an agency that is basically run by bureaucrats that are not elected. So we have no recourse on your actions, but you have recourse on our actions. My question would be, you show us this registration that is going to expire in 3 years. What happens after 3 years now that you know everybody that has a well? And I mean, where's the limits?
Andy, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. So our board, again, on the agenda, shows who's on our board, and those are elected officials. And that's, why I think there's such an interest in hearing what you guys think about this. So we're not the decision makers. The board is the decision makers. We put information together and make recommendations, as does our advisory committee. So this is a proposal for the next 3 years to get to the end. So this big technical plan that's just getting underway now, in 3 years, we will have that. So we'll have a much better picture of what the groundwater conditions are. We'll have, through that groundwater user registration program, we'll have much better information than we have now, because all we're using hello, can you hear me? All we have now is existing information compiled from data sets from the state, from the county, and others in the cities. And like I say, we're working hard to make sure it's as representative and correct and current as possible, but we probably won't get everything right. And so in 3 years, we're hoping to have things much more correct than they are. And that's when our board decides, do we want to end this fee now? We got this plan in place. The groundwater basin looks awesome. There's nothing we really need to do. Or do we need to do some more work here and there, whether it's around a water quality issue, whether there's some depressions? Are there projects that we want to enhance where there's a stormwater recharge project we could do? So the board would make the decision at that 3-year mark. So there'll be another kind of series of meetings like this leading up to that to report out what this plan is saying. And at that point, they decide, do we end this? Do we keep it going the same, or we need to change it to make it more representative and a higher value?
We had a advisory committee member here, Rue Furch, who I think wanted to make a comment.
I just wanted to remind everybody that we're not choosing to do this. The state has required us to do this. We live in one of the identified basins that the Department of Water Resources has said, you have to manage your water supply, and you have to write a plan that we will approve or not in order to manage your water supply. The state has recognized that this basin has been in overdraft, and so we need to get a handle on that. So this is our opportunity, such as it is, for local control. If they do it, they will do it however they want. It's certainly not anything we would all say, oh yes, let's go do this, but we don't have a choice.
Hi, I think this is a great idea, I think this is a great idea, managing the groundwater. When I moved up here, we ended up with a nitrate polluted well, and we called the water group here in the county, and they basically said, well, we only deal with people who manage large 10-unit family wells and that stuff, so you're on your own. And we couldn't get any help with it at all. We had to kind of read the books ourselves and figure it out. So this is a great plan in the sense of managing the groundwater, but it just really seems like we haven't taken into account carrying capacity since, at least since I moved up here, as to how many people you move into an area with limited water supplies. Did we not have any idea that groundwater was a finite resource? I guess that's my question. And so now, after the fact, we just put up how many thousand homes out here on Pleasant Hill and all these other developments. Somebody just put in a 44-acre vineyard next to me, told me that grapes don't use much water, and then after they bought the property, they put in 6 10,000-gallon water storage tanks. So I kind of question some of the decision-making in the planning department. Are they working with you on this? Are we going to limit growth to a sustainability carrying capacity concept? That's my question.
Maybe Sandy, you're right in the thick of that. Maybe you could respond to that.
So recently at one of the GSA Advisory Committee meetings, we had the staff geologist from Permit Sonoma to come and talk to us about the connection between the county's land use policies and managing the resource. And I will tell you that the county was one of the first governmental agencies to have a water resource element in the general plan. So you might be familiar with that. I'm getting a sign that I'm not close enough to the mic. Okay. So the county does take into consideration water use when new land uses go into an area. They have been implementing these policies since 2006, and I think that oftentimes we see legacy impacts to our groundwater system, but also it's clear that new uses are going in all the time and that are sometimes water intensive. So the county has a monitoring program. They require a groundwater analysis and mitigation measures before those uses go in. So that's about as much information as I have on the land use side. But I think Andy mentioned that for the well registration, that the GSAs are working with the Ag Commissioner as well as Permit Sonoma, who also has the well installation permit authority in the county. So it's all, pretty interdisciplinary, but folks are working in a collaborative way.
And I just would point out that I think that SGMA, one of the benefits that I think a lot of people in the groundwater world thought from SGMA is that it really requires, for the first time, planning people and water people to communicate. And it doesn't, the GSA cannot make land use decisions, but it does require us to communicate with the planning folks and for them to take into account groundwater conditions. So hopefully that will lead to better things, better projects. I think we had
I have a couple questions, but the first one is, when you gave the examples 1, 2, and 3, you didn't give one on wineries or other commercial businesses. Do you have a plan for that to do the rate? Because wineries use about 14 gallons of water per case of wine just to make that. And we make about 15 million cases of wine here in the county. So has that been taken into account?
Yeah, so wineries would be assessed based on their reported usage on that per acre foot, $20 per acre foot charge. So wineries fall under the commercial category, and they either report their usage to the state as a public water supply system or to the county as part of their use permit. So we have data on the wineries in the basin, and they would be assessed based on their measured and reported usage.
Okay. The other thing I have a question on, and I know you have 4 studies that you've pulled the data from, I still have a hard time believing that you're assuming that the rural residential users are using a half of an acre foot per year, which is 466 gallons per day. Okay? We have a septic system. That septic system is designed for 120 gallons per meter, one time, per bedroom. Okay? So we have 2 people in our house. We have been averaging over the last 7 years, because I've kept records, 42 gallons per day for use when we're allowed 120. And you're saying the average is 466 gallons per day. Where does the rest of the 424 gallons per day go? Because it's not going out onto our land. And plus, you do not irrigate, as we all know here, from September until probably April for your lawns and things. So where does the rest of that water go?
So again, the estimate is an average, and I'm not saying that you use 466 gallons. I know I sure don't.
But that's average.
I know. And again, these studies, we questioned them too, but they all center around that. There's a study at Napa. There's a study in the Rohnert Park area. There's a study that came out of the Department of Water Resources. And this is what they all hover around. And so that's what we need to use. So until there's a study that is perhaps better or more current, and these studies are pretty current already, we have to use what we got. And so that's where that number comes from. Luckily, it really doesn't, equate to a fee that is too significant at this point.
And I think one of the other
understand.
interesting pieces of data that we did find as we were going through this is that the average parcel size for rural residential is 3.2 acres, which is a pretty large parcel when you think about it. And if someone has a pretty extensive garden and animals, that can it can add up to a lot of water. So that's yeah.
To that end, we live on an acre as well. I pump the water from below the surface of the ground to the top of the surface of the ground, use the water, and it percolates back down to the water supply. It never leaves my land. So technically, I'm not even using water other than something that evaporates. So I don't get it.
I understand. I'm in the same boat.
Yeah, I would just like to say that not only are we not using, we're recharging on 3.5 acres the water table, whereas the city of Santa Rosa is sucking it up and sending it up to the geysers. Is that what they're still doing, sending it up there? So, you know, when it comes to the net usage, rural residential users are probably one of your least people. I know you have statistics are based on somebody's perspective and approach to the data often, and I think we're kind of questioning that approach to the data because there's a lot of us and we're a source of revenue. And that's kind of a sad perspective, but it is truly the perspective we all have. And the other comment I had was we got $1 million from each from 2 different sources that funded this for the last year. So for 3 years, it's going to cost us X amount of money and it'll be $8. But then in 3 years, those $2 million contributions will not be there, so it will be 3 times as much, right? You know what I'm saying? And when you add inflation to the quotient, it'll be actually more than that. So it's another escalating cost that, you know, it start out at $8 and then suddenly it's $20 and then suddenly it's $40 and then next thing you know, it's $120 parcel tax, just like we get hit with all the time. Yeah, we got hit with the fire, Cal Fire and all these people. So that's the problem we're having.
Yeah, understood. And just at the end of the 3 years, we will be done with the planning. So the large plan that's underway, we won't be doing anymore going forward. So.
Good evening. I'm Colleen Fernald. I was on the Russian River Watershed Council with Rue Furch. I joined in 2004. And unfortunately, that group is missing. I think it could really help leverage the gap that I see here. And I just want to say, for the record, I'm not a property owner. I'm rural residential. I just have a vested interest in having a healthy watershed where we share the water fairly and we are accurate in all of the science and all of the measurement. So the more resistance that you have to be involved, I suggest the deeper you jump in and stay involved. And you make sure it's going to be accountable and that they're going to use the money well. Okay, so that's kind of funny. So, well, it's true, and you're asking some very important, good questions about, it depends on the type of crop and what you're doing with that crop when it comes to ag, okay? So it's not an even thing. So there are some high-intensity crops here that, what happens to them? Yeah, a lot of people can drink them, and then the water kind of stays here, but how much, on average, of a water produced for a case of wine that gets exported, that never comes back, so that we might think about managing the types of crops that we produce for our food security, for our groundwater security. And there's another myth that's going on right now, that these fires are caused by climate change. Could it also be that we have a serious water depletion effort that's happening that's going unnoticed? That's why you got to jump in. That's why everyone has to work together to become accountable as much as possible. And when it comes to quality and not just quantity, because both of these things are important. And some of these people that take this money and they think that they're going to lead you down a trail called sustainability is going to say, oh yeah, we'll solve the problem of overdraft with recycled water. Oh, you're just going to concentrate the pollutants. So with all the problems that we're having right now, with Santa Rosa not being able to maintain the sewer in a flood, why are we using precious groundwater to move toxic human waste? And now that we have a chance to rebuild and rebuild right, why can't we do it one house, one property at a time? So none of these ideas are going to be able to manifest if everybody's sitting on the sidelines and you let the usual suspects who are on these boards that don't care how many wineries come into the West County because they're getting lots of money one way or the other. And I don't mean to put it all on the wineries, okay? So it's all about the devil in those details. So please help us exorcise the devil from any fiction that they want to call facts in this assessment, and please participate. Thank you very much.
Other comments or questions?
One thing I haven't really heard in these discussions is a little bit of the background on how SGMA got started during the drought, you know, that, well, it was mentioned at the beginning that, you know, there was a lot of depletion of groundwater in the Central Valley, and, you know, at the state level, this was a crisis that really was about, you know, serious problems with groundwater in the San Joaquin Valley. And many of the coastal watersheds, coastal groundwater basins, some have big problems down the Central Coast. Our area, it's not so bad. There are some problems, but not too much. And I think one thing everybody should keep in mind is that we're in a situation where we have a system proposed that would protect groundwater resources for everybody in this shared resource before it's a problem. And it'll be a lot easier in the long run to be able to be sure that the groundwater is there for your well if we can head off problems before they really get started. So when you think about the money that you're being asked to pay as this fee on an annual basis, you might also think in terms of it being something of an insurance policy to head off problems before they really get started.
Other comments or questions? Do you mind if I grab him first and then I'll come back up to you? Oh, I'm so sorry.
I have a question to ask. Who's exempt on this thing? And in other words, are hospitals or large corporations exempt? Is the county exempt from the using of their wells? And the second question is, I don't mind the fee that we're charged and paying back to the community, but we would be paying for this twice. If we go shopping in Santa Rosa, the large corporations are just going to come back and raise their prices and shove it down our throats. And have you taken that into consideration? This way, everybody's paying twice for the same thing what you're paying for. The Demps, for example, they use a lot of water. They just raise their prices. The quarries would do the same thing. And we'd be paying twice for the decisions that you make, and I don't think this is right. Thank you.
I can, I guess, maybe with Marcus's help, but the exempt folks would be the sovereign nations, so tribes are exempt from being assessed fees. So the Grayton Rancheria is exempt from SGMA, but they've been very involved with the planning. They're participated on our advisory committee, and they're funding some significant monitoring programs in their area, and that information is very beneficial to us. So Santa Rosa, I had the Santa Rosa example. So what they're pumping, they have an acre-foot charge that pays for the GSA. Right. We have to go with the mic.
Sorry, we're taping this meeting, so we just need to have people on the mic so that they can hear.
Now, can you hear? Okay. The question I have is, you're price gouging the people in Santa Rosa for the amount of water that they're using because they're going to have a tax on their city tax probably to pay for this, as well as paying for the water meter, the use of the water, and everything else. And there's going to be a lot of people that are going to not be able to pay it.
So maybe Sandy could, sure, Sandy, you're not Santa Rosa, but you're with the town of Windsor. Maybe you could respond how you guys would handle the groundwater fee and maybe what some of the other cities might do.
I'm going to just kick in. Just last night, we had a meeting at the city of Rohnert Park, and that same question, which I appreciate, was asked. So what's going to happen when Rohnert Park starts paying their fees? Is it going to show up in everybody's bills? And basically the answer was that amount was considered and incorporated many years ago, so there will be no difference essentially going forward. So that's the Rohnert Park example. I don't know about the other cities.
So there's 3 basins in Sonoma County. How are the other 2 being funded? Are they doing fees to their rural parcels?
Right now, they are not. They are being funded by the member agencies that are moving forward. The reason they didn't go to fees at this time was that, as I mentioned before, they have the same cost overhead right now, and so that would be a significant fee, much more than we're talking about here in the Santa Rosa Plain.
I guess just being a practical person, why didn't Sonoma County, the 3 basins, join together to deal with these issues and come up with a similar plan? That's all I have.
Good question.
So I think that when we talked about at the beginning that this was a new law, it came out of Sacramento, and it brought a framework for folks to do local groundwater management. And there was a 2-year period for us to form our GSAs by law. And during that discussion, there was a very strong interest in maintaining local control. People in the town of Sonoma didn't want folks from Santa Rosa telling them how to manage their groundwater. People from Windsor didn't want people from Petaluma telling them how to manage their groundwater. And so the way that the governance structures evolve was initially to create these 3 separate governing agencies that would be controlled by a board of directors, all elected officials, that would allow for the greatest amount of local control and accountability. And the law requires that we have coordination between these 3 GSAs, because you can see from the map that they all border each other at some point. And where that boundary is, there's some kind of interaction between groundwater that needs to be coordinated between the GSAs. And this is not to say that in the future, moving forward, that there couldn't be changes in the governance structures of the various GSAs. And recently, the state also was looking at other potential regulated groundwater basins in the county. So the SGMA right now applies to these basins, but in the future, it could apply to others. So just moving forward, I think that we're trying to do our best to allow folks to be able to control their destiny, but also to collaborate and have efficient use of the resources.
So another question I have is in regards to the board members. Apparently they're getting paid, because most of these fees are probably salaries.
My understanding is board members are not paid. They come from their local jurisdiction. They're sitting as city council members or board of supervisors members, and like many of their commitments and obligations, they do that on their own time as a service to the community.
Then what is the $3 million over 5 years going toward? What is that fee? What are we paying for?
I think Andy can give you the details, but the gist of it is it pays for the development of the groundwater sustainability plan, which is the roadmap for reaching the sustainability as required by law, and also for administration of the agency.
I was busy looking through, and of course I can't find it, but there's a lot of things that it pays for. The state has, I'm sorry, the podium's between us. The state requires quite a bit of tasks that we have to do and a time frame within which to do them. So as you saw, we had to have a GSA formed by June of 2017, and there's a lot of legal thresholds that need to be met, and then a lot of outreach-related goals, and then we have the technical side that Sandy just described. So there's a lot of things that an agency needs to do to operate and be compliant with SGMA.
So I just want to point out that the full agency budget is on the website, and it's a actually pretty simple budget. And if you have any questions, I'm sure that Andy or myself could answer them. But yeah, do take a look. You can see kind of how the money is spent. Do we have other questions or comments?
Hi, yeah, I'm having a hard time swallowing all that water, just so you know, I'm one of those. But my question is on your budget, you know, you're proposing a budget. What happens if you don't get enough money? Do you have a clamp on how much you could increase?
So if we don't get, so you're saying that if what we charge doesn't get us where we need to go? Is that, yeah, wait, I don't know. I think that all this planning, hopefully that's not going to be an issue, but we've also been successful in seeking grants, has been described. That's one way that it could be. We would look to our member agencies to make up the gap, or change some things around and see if the state will let us do things in a different way. I mean, we would tackle that as aggressively as we can, as soon as we can, and hopefully we saw it far enough advance so it actually never happened. We can see it coming and do something about it before it actually is an impact. Well, the fee is fixed for 3 years. The fee is fixed. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Anybody who hasn't spoken, and this will be kind of a last shot here at them. So anybody else? Colleen, I'll get to you in just a second. Nope. Okay.
I'm really interested in seeing the takeaway soon is that we have a groundwater assessment in every groundwater basin in our region. So we have had one in Sonoma Valley started, and then the Santa Rosa Plain happened. But you're right, they're selling out the farm without knowing how much water is there in the West County. And I think that's irresponsible. So as far back as Proposition 50, which I don't agree with taxing us, fines and fees and all the rest, but we did tax ourselves. And I went to Cal EPA, who was managing that grant process, and I said, this is what's important. You know how much groundwater you have. You have a groundwater management program, and you have everyone invested in solving the problem. The big water users, the big agencies, the rural people, everyone invested. They changed the plan mid-cycle in Proposition 50. And this county was one of 7 counties that came up with millions of dollars. LA had to go back and do it over again. It's related to the fee because I told them that was important. They said yes. Now, so this is late in coming that you're actually having to do it, but it's critically important. So we've seen there's a carrot and a stick kind of an approach. They're providing you with the carrot right here. The stick is the state. But I'd like to see some more incentive for people more willing to get involved, to go the extra mile, would help with that assessment in an easier way. Because I'm telling you, it's critical. We know how much water is being used. So please encourage everyone you know that's a water user, and that's what, everyone, to get involved with coming up, participating, and determining accuracy in getting solutions going. Because you will be sold a bill of goods if you don't stay involved, every single one of the stakeholders. So thank you for showing up, and just stay involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that was a good comment to, I think, end our session with, unless anyone has one last final burning question that they want to ask. We'll be sticking around. If you want to just talk to us about your individual situation, please feel free to do that. As Andy said, the board meets next Thursday at 1 o'clock in Santa Rosa. We will have this meeting posted, the meeting that was taped posted early next week, and also the summary of the meeting comments. But if you do want to speak directly to the board, please feel free to come to that meeting if you can. And again, thank you so much for coming tonight. Really appreciate it.